My dear brothers and sisters, here at Holy Cross, we continue with the series on Paul's letter to the Galatians, and we now move to chapter 3, verses 6 and 7. And in these two verses, Paul says, just as Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness, so, you see, those who believe are the descendants of Abraham. Now, on the surface, this is wild fancy, because the reality is, I'm not a Jew. And perhaps most of you are not Jews, or at least related to Jews. So the idea of you being descendants of Abraham on the surface level is foolishness and is absurd. But what Paul is saying here is really profound. And there's a reason that he is pointing to Abraham to make his point here. Now, we all know that Abraham comes before Moses and before the giving of the law. And I talk about this in my series of Paul's letter to the Romans. And here Paul is making a similar point. Paul is rooting our identity as being children of God in something that came before the law. See, what Paul says is what it initially meant to be one of the chosen people, one of the people who were children of God, was that it meant that we were descendants of Abraham. You see, Abraham received these promises of God, and what God asked of Abraham was that Abraham would take a chance on God, and that taking a chance on God, he would in some ways live into this relationship with God. Now, this relationship with God meant new land and a new place and a new sense of family and purpose for Abraham. What it meant was that Abraham now was rooted in something other than Abraham or Abraham's purposes. Now Abraham was rooted in the purposes of God. And so what Paul wants to say here is, look, just as Abraham believed God, and so it was reckoned to him as righteousness, so you see, those who believe are the descendants of Abraham, which is to say, we receive through Jesus Christ, we become now heirs of God and also heirs of Abraham. And as heirs of Abraham, we become children of God who receive that first promise that Abraham received thousands of years ago. Part of what Paul is saying is your identity in the world is now changed. Your identity as Greek or Parthian or Mede or Elamite or someone from Cappadocia or somewhere else, that's no longer important. Because what truly is important is your identity in Jesus Christ. And as a son of God through Jesus Christ, you also now inherit all the promises God has given to God's chosen people. In many ways, what Paul is saying is you are now part of salvation history. God's love affair with the chosen people, with the human race, you're now part of that story. Root yourself deeply in that story. Know that story and love that story so that your heart might be on fire for what it is that Jesus is giving to you, which is to say, Jesus is now our doorway to God. Jesus shows us what it means for God to love us. Jesus shows us what it means for us to receive God's love and to be transformed by grace, and to receive that grace with faith. Paul is saying, you have a story to live into. I have a story to live into. We all have a story to live into that is so much bigger than any of us can ever imagine. Paul is asking these Galatians to turn to Jesus and the whole story of God's unfolding love affair with humanity through his chosen people, through Abraham, through Jesus, through the prophets, through Moses, and yes, through us as well. Amen, and God bless.